So, Jeremy Corbyn has been suspended from the Labour Party. Well, there's a surprise. The campaign against Jeremy Corbyn was begun the day that he stood for the leadership of the Labour Party. He won that campaign fair and square by exposing the monstrosities imposed upon the Labour movement under Tony Blair and the previous leadership of the Labour Party, which went to war in Iraq and killed a policy that killed hundreds of thousands of people. Some people estimate up to 2 million people died as a consequence of that war. Tony Blair wanted to reform the Labour Party into a party that was in the pay and under the control of big business. And when Jeremy Corbyn was elected, all that suddenly was brought into question. And this manifested itself inside the machinery of the Labour Party, inside amongst the members of the Labour Party in Parliament, the Parliamentary Party, which was overwhelmingly pro-Blairite in 2015. Inside the trade unions, the majority of the trade union leadership were totally opposed to Jeremy Corbyn, but there were some who were sensing the mood of discontent who sided with Jeremy, all the better to try and control him, all the better to try and, manipulate him and make him a sort of an agent of the establishment, try and persuade him to come on board with the rest of them. And once Jeremy began to advance his position inside the Labour Party, once it was clear that he was going to win the election, all hell broke out and panic struck the ruling classes. And by the ruling classes, I mean the people who own and control this country, the people who own the land, the people who own the big businesses, and the people who control the civil service and the media. Now, they ran a national and an international campaign to attack Jeremy Corbyn. Part of that campaign was organised by sections of the Israeli intelligence services or something associated with that. And that has been quite well documented. I mean, there was a programme published on Al Jazeera, I think it was called The Takedown or something like that, where they exposed how the Israeli embassy had sent in agents to try and influence the dynamics inside the Labour Party and inside the Conservative Party. I mean, to try and, foreign power interfering in political politics in Britain to serve their interests. Now, Jeremy was in a very weak position when he was first elected. On the one side, he had mass support from members and new members, but he was also in a weak position because the Parliamentary Party only had a handful of serious left-wing activists who were prepared to stand by the type of agenda that Jeremy and others in what was called Labour Briefing and the Labour Representation Committee, of which I was a member myself. We used to sit in a committee of 5, 10, 15 people. We were outsiders all the time. And when Jeremy was elected, all that was overturned and the opportunity emerged for the creation of a mass socialist Labour Party. Now, Jeremy was at home. I remember going to the meeting when they got the day his election victory was announced, and there were about 200 of us in the pub and in Westminster. And that same day, there was a rally in defence of refugees and so on, and Jeremy's in his element, talking at rallies, at speeches, to the masses, to the activists. That's his natural domain. And then, of course, came the Brexit referendum, and there was an insipid campaign by the right wing inside the party to try and sabotage Jeremy Corbyn because he didn't have an openly pro-Europe position. Instead of this, what he did was, and I remember showing a friend of mine a video of him talking about the EU referendum, and he pointed out the facts. The EU is not an institution for the people of Britain or the people of Europe. the EU is an institution for and on behalf of capitalism, of the big capitalist companies in Europe. And on the other side, the sort of sections of the landed aristocracy and part of the petty bourgeois associated with Nigel Farage and so on, and also a layer of the working class who felt discontented, had a kind of democratic sentiment that Britain should have some independence, which had a long tradition inside the Labour movement, by the way. Don't forget, Tony Benn was campaigning against joining the EU, and he argued in, for example, Arguments for Socialism and Arguments for Democracy, two of his books, he argued quite clearly that he felt that the EU was an anti-democratic institution and it undermined the capacity to establish socialism. So that's why Jeremy took an intermediate position on all these questions. It was a very difficult position to take, I don't deny that. And unless you really emphasize the class nature of society, it was a very difficult message to get through. So after this, there was this orchestrated campaign against Jeremy Corbyn by Portland Communication. I remember going to the offices of Portland Communication and taking them up because they had this, I can't remember his name, Tom something or other, he was working for Portland Communication, connected with Alistair Campbell and the co. And they were organising a campaign to sabotage and undermine Jeremy. And what they did was then they had this coup d'etat, this what they call chicken coup, where one member of the cabinet or shadow cabinet resigned after another, all with the same letter, and they were supposed to deliver, I think every 10 minutes or every 20 minutes, deliver another resignation letter to sap away the confidence. And Jeremy and John McDonnell, they told us, I was at meetings of the LRC, private meetings, sometimes in Portcullis House, sometimes at other places, and John McDonnell would come to the room and he would say, listen, we're walking into the Monday night meeting of the Parliamentary Labour Party. And as me and Jeremy walk into the room, we are being hissed and booed and sneered at. And this is an atmosphere of traitors and get rid of them. And this sort of thing was being shouted across the hall. This was the atmosphere in which Jeremy and John McDonnell were campaigning. Now, I believe that they made some very serious mistakes. In particular, when they won that second election, when Jeremy won the second election, when you win a victory, you see, Jeremy unfortunately is a little bit of a pacifist. And when you win a victory, as far as I'm concerned, that gives you the power to wield the sword. And that's what should have been done. Jeremy and John McDonnell should have gone on the offensive, attacked the right wing inside the Labour Party. They should have called on the Momentum members, and unfortunately that was sabotaged by John Landsman in his sort of, I don't know why he was doing this. He's a very egotistical individual who basically ruined the opportunity to make a Momentum into a mass revolutionary force for change. But in any case, instead of mobilising the movement and ousting the members of Parliament, Jeremy always offered the hand to them, thinking that maybe they'll come round, maybe they'll agree to mandate, maybe we can gradually and slowly reform the Labour Party. And of course, these people ran an incessant campaign, day in, day out. And one of their most bizarre methods was to make the wild assertions of anti-Semitism. And it just begged belief. But you see, if you throw shit at people every single day, day in, day out, some people come to believe it. And of course, the mass media just constantly harped on about anti-Semitism. Beyond a joke, every single... I was at the meeting, for example, when they tried to organise a coup d'etat. I was at the meeting where, what's her name, Chukri, I can't remember her name. She was commissioned with writing a report on anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. She used to be a lawyer or something like that. I can't remember her name now. Slips my mind. But anyway, she made a presentation. Jeremy was at the meeting as well. I was at the back of the meeting standing next to Mark Wordsworth. And Mark Wordsworth was, first this Ruth Smeeth intervened. And Ruth Smeeth sat there and said something, aren't you, I can't remember exactly what it was, but she made some complaint. And she was a member of Parliament. And Mark Wordsworth didn't even know she was a member of Parliament. And basically, he said that, what you're saying is like the Daily Telegraph, I'd expect you to say that. And then she looked over, I saw her face, she was carefully contemplating what she would do. And then she feigned bursting out crying and stormed out of the room. And this was supposedly because she imagined that, oh, I could use that as a way of saying, oh, someone accused me of being in league with the media, which means that if I'm Jewish and in league with the media, it means the media is controlled by the Jews. And that's what he's saying. And you see, this is the kind of madness that has been passed off as honesty and truth since Jeremy Corbyn came. It didn't matter what lie they told. It didn't matter what stories they made up. Any story was good enough. Mark Wordsworth was expelled. Now, Jackie Walker, a friend of mine, Jackie Walker was in the Labour Representation Committee. When she was first suspended, John MacDonald made a phone call to her that afternoon and said, you must take them to court. But afterwards, the pressure was increased and increased and increased, and John MacDonald began to distance himself, the social distancing from activists who he'd worked with for decades. And that was the problem. You must stand by your core support and deal with the enemy rather than allow, the enemy, look how they're behaving. They have no qualms about attacking us now. And since Keir Starmer was elected, did you ever once hear anything about systematic racism or anti-Semitism in the Labour Party? As soon as Keir Starmer was elected, the media forgot all about it. That's how they behave in Britain. This is a direct coup against the Labour Party. That's what's happening now. And it's a coup being carried out with the backing of the most powerful forces in the establishment in Britain, which are some of the most powerful forces in the establishment in the world. They want to make sure that the Labour Party never again becomes a party which advocates socialist ideas and mobilises the masses. They want to demobilise the people. They want the people passive, inactive. And then politicians can play their games in Parliament and get on with the usual practice of ensuring that big business makes money and the mass of people suffer. Now, let me just give you another example. In 2017, during the election campaign at that time, I was involved in running around the streets, mobilising to the degree I could and with the skills I've got for Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. I'm also a member of the press. I've got an NUJ card. I was on the press list of the Labour Party. At that time, throughout the campaign in 2017, when we nearly won the election, don't forget, against all odds, Jeremy went from 28% in the May elections, in the council elections, and then it went up in the general election to 40% of the vote. And that's how we deprived Theresa May of a majority. And what happened at that time? I didn't get one single email from the press office of the Labour Party telling us about events going on. Many members of Parliament who were trying to sabotage Jeremy, what they did was they called Jeremy to a meeting. They said, come down to Northampton or something like that. You go to Northampton or Peterborough, for example. Come down to Peterborough, and then he goes to Peterborough, and there's like 3 members of the party there. They haven't organised a rally. They haven't organised a demo. They haven't organised some speeches. And what happened was, actually, that one of the insiders who had been campaigning alongside Jeremy for many years, Marsha Jane Thomas, she managed to push. Jeremy was always been pushed from one side to another by all these sort of crooks surrounding Chakrabarti's right. Yeah, someone put it out by all these crooks inside the establishment of the Labour Party. And Marsha Jane Thomas came from the activist groups that I was involved in as well. We sat in meetings together and so on. We campaigned at the beginning. We were angry at the way the campaign was not fully mobilising at the beginning in 2015. And Marsha Jane Thomas, I remember being told the story. There was this Libertines gig in, I think it was Liverpool, and the team, his team, who of course, somehow connected with the establishment, sort of minor way connected with the establishment, they didn't want him to go to this rally. And so, but Marsha Jane Thomas said, you must go. And someone would go, no, don't do that. People will throw bottles at you. It'd be a disaster. And he went into the rally, and the Libertines guy turned around and he goes, look, we got a special guest for you today. It's Jeremy Corbyn. And that's when this chant went up. Oh, Jeremy Corbyn. And tens of thousands of young people began chanting and cheering his name because Jeremy Corbyn represented hope, represented integrity, represented honesty. I went round in 2015. I said to people, give me 3 words that summarise Jeremy Corbyn. And these are the words they used: integrity, honesty, hope. Now, of course, these three ideas that you have someone standing up for the masses, standing up for the people, these ideas must be crushed. And that's why Jeremy Corbyn had to be ousted. They did everything they could to oust him, everything. And sometimes, of course, one man on his own, surrounded by a handful of people who are actually supporting his ideals, managed, against all the odds in the circumstances, to retain his position. But he did so at the expense of maintaining the integrity of his programme and policies. However, come the election last year, after having been sabotaged by the so-called pro-referendum campaign, the pro-EU fighters, those who argued that we must keep in the EU no matter what, even if people voted against, we must stay inside the EU. And these people sabotaged the Labour Party. Some people called themselves left-wing and were campaigning for another Europe is possible and so on. We had lost the referendum. We should have accepted that, as Jeremy did originally, and moved on. And in that way, we could have influenced the dynamic of what happened. Instead of this, it appeared that the Labour Party, under Jeremy Corbyn, was sabotaging the Brexit vote that had happened, and was desperate to stay inside the EU. And that, of course, undermined the position of Jeremy Corbyn and of the Labour left inside the northern, the Red Wall, as they call it, which eventually went Tory. Now, but what Jeremy was able to do, was one of the last things they could do, was Jeremy could write alongside Andy Fisher, actually. He was also in the Labour Representation Committee and Labour Briefing in the old days, before Jeremy Corbyn was elected. And Andrew Fisher wrote this manifesto. Well, the manifesto was okay. It had some good ideas in it, but it was just like sucking ideas out of your thumb, because they did not have that base behind them. Free broadband, for example, that's a good idea. Huge spending program, that's a good idea, but you had to have spent that time in advance of that, explaining to the masses how they would be able to achieve these objectives. And that meant the trade unions and the labour movement would have to act collectively, not only to win a vote, but also to change society at the grassroots. Now, as it happens, madness hit the world immediately the election was over. As soon as Brexit was carried through, the coronavirus crisis came along, which is not a coronavirus crisis. The coronavirus crisis is a crisis of world capitalism. The profit rate had been declining in advance of 2020, and that profit rate, when the profit rate is too low, then capitalists begin to fold their arms and stop investing. This was then exacerbated by the lockdowns and the crisis around coronavirus. And then the government, the Conservative government, carried out passed legislation that allowed them to spend what Jeremy Corbyn had proposed spending in 5 years for the benefit of the people: NHS, welfare, housing, healthcare, education. What Jeremy Corbyn had proposed for 5 years spending, they have allocated in 1 year to transfer money primarily towards the wealthiest sections of society in Britain and the companies that have done very well under the coronavirus crisis. Tech companies and all the pharmaceutical companies, testing companies now are doing very well. All the buddies of the establishment, all the parasites and pigs jumping in the trough of government money being thrown around. And these are the people who said in December last year that there is no money tree when Jeremy Corbyn stood in the election. And everyone in all the media, Laura Koonsberg and all the rest of them, joined in this. Oh, there's no money tree. There's no money tree. He thinks there's a money tree. In fact, he thinks there's a money forest. And it was 7 of them ganging up on Jeremy. And that's the way in which these people operate. They're not interested in genuine democratic discussion. They're not interested in free and open debate. They're not interested in honest discussion. They will do anything to preserve their position, power and privileges. That is the lesson we must learn from this. This is a campaign to destroy the Labour movement as a socialist political force. That's the idea behind it. And of course we must mobilise up and down the country in order to not only defeat these attacks on Jeremy Corbyn, but also to forge a mass party of the working class. But of course, it's very difficult at the moment. They have the advantage at the moment. That's one of the reasons why I am now standing for Mayor of London, not only on the coronavirus issues, but on the social and political issues of the day that need to be brought up, because we've been let down totally by the Labour Party during this crisis. If you watch the interview with Lord, I think it's Sumption, I think his name is, the Supreme Court judge who did a broadcast only a couple of days ago, I honestly must say I didn't realise the extent of the dictatorial legislative framework that has been introduced since the coronavirus laws were introduced. And most of these laws have been, or regulations and stipulations, have been illegal. So not only was the proroguing of Parliament story, but everything since coronavirus has come about has been based on illegality and the transfer of power towards the executive, with the objective that Dominic Cummings wants to create some kind of Bonapartist or Bismarckian state, where every now and again you're called upon to vote yes or no on an issue, and the parliamentary elections in future will be basically yes or no. They won't be about different political parties representing real differences of opinion. And that was what Jeremy Corbyn was. He stood out as different. He stood for something different. He stood for something new. He stood for empowering the people. He didn't do it. He didn't achieve it. But at least he tried to make a marker. You know, there's a famous Greek philosopher, Archimedes, and he said, "Give me a fulcrum and I will move the universe. Give me a point of reference, a place to stand, and I will move the universe. I can change the world if you show that you are determined, if you show that you're prepared to stand up to all the lies and slander and abuse that circulates in this world." And that is what Jeremy Corbyn did, to the degree that he could, in the difficult circumstances he was in. So although I have many, many criticisms of what happened under Jeremy Corbyn, and even of Jeremy Corbyn himself, I stand full square with him. He has never been anti-Semitic. Livingston is not anti-Semitic. Mark Wadsworth is not anti-Semitic. Jackie Walker is not anti-Semitic. These are lies propagated by the establishment in order to undermine the strength of the labour and trade union movement in Britain and around the world. There was a global campaign, what they call a takedown, a plan to take down Jeremy Corbyn and destroy him and destroy what he stands for. But once upon a time there was a discussion when they attacked Jeremy Corbyn, and they said, they compared him to Obi-Wan Kenobi. If you strike me down, I will become 1,000 times more powerful. That is the task of the labour movement today, to mobilise in the community, to organise defence of the people during this present crisis, to protect the interests of the working class, to defend our communities, to bring us together, to protect us. Those who are fearful of illness, protect them. Those who wish to engage in collective endeavour, let them do so. Let them combine. Let them discover the truth. Let people discover science. Let people discover the arguments around it, for and against one position or another. Where is the democracy? We don't have a democracy in this country now. It's been abolished in the name of fighting coronavirus. And in the meantime, what we have is the Labour Party and Conservative Party acting as Tweedledee and Tweedledum. There is no opposition. The opposition must come from you, ladies and gentlemen. It must come from the mass of working people up and down this country. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be speaking again a bit later.